Consultation services are provided at no cost to employers. It's a cooperative agreement funded by federal OSHA. It is not staffed by OSHA, but it's funded by OSHA and the Department of Labor in combination with University of Wisconsin. It's really developed and focuses on smaller employers. The focus is on companies with less than 500 employees and establishments with less than 250 employees. We provide assistance across the board, but that's really what the government funding is for. Again, it's delivered by University of Wisconsin employees here at the Wisconsin State Laboratory of Hygiene. And any possible violations that of OSHA standards that we would find, they're identified, but they're not reported to OSHA. And so the enforcement, and that is to OSHA enforcement staff. That is, unless the employer fails to eliminate or control that hazard. And so the key here is if you are interested in addressing hazards and correcting them, we're a perfect resource. But if you choose not to correct it, then because government funds are getting used, we are obligated to let OSHA know a hazard is out there. But again, when you work with us cooperatively, no information about your hazards go to OSHA. There's no penalties, no citations, nothing of that type. We have now 17 field professionals. We've got a total of over 141 years of combined experience. So we have individuals that are as new as being with us for about 2 months. They're having an interesting time trying to start work in and amongst how work is being done here, and other bodies like myself that have over 30 years in. And so the consultation process, if you really request a service, the first thing is you need to contact us. We can only help businesses when the owner of the business, the management staff, requests assistance. And that owner or management staff simply needs to contact us. We'll schedule a visit. The consultant will set a time to meet, and they may ask for information ahead of time. During that meeting, they'll have this looks something similar to what OSHA does since they lay out the format, but there's an opening conference. What's the scope of work you want us to do? What is it you want us to cover? And we will limit what we do to that scope. We'll do a walk-around inspection. We'll talk in a second about what a virtual walk-around inspection is. We will do records review. In the normal mode, we would do industrial hygiene monitoring and a closing conference. Following the visit, you would receive the monitoring results if that's what we were doing, and you would then get a comprehensive report. Finally, you need to correct the hazards, and you need to send us documentation on how you have corrected the hazards we've identified, and we then can close out the case. So that's the basic flow. Right now, we have virtual visits. We're not physically traveling. I'll talk about that in just a second. But how do you prepare for a virtual visit? Well, basically, it's a live video chat. So you're going to have either a Zoom or a WebEx or whatever platform meeting with a consultant, and you will talk with them in that format. Now, ideally, if you've got that on a tablet or a phone, you can walk around and point the phone at what you have a concern with, and then the consultant will provide you feedback. You might collect some short videos and show those to the consultant during that meeting. You might have floor plans. You might have hand illustrations. There's a lot of different ways that we can do this without physically being there. I'm going to say that it's uncomfortable for our consultants to work in that mode. And the reason is that we don't know what you're not showing us. If we're physically there, we know what's right around it. And so I will caution you that the advice we give you is based on the information you give us. If you show us only part of it, we'll give you an answer associated with that part. But if there's something else you didn't tell us, sorry, our answer is qualified based on what that is. How do you request services? You can go online to the State Lab of Hygiene Wisconsin page. That's slh.wisc.edu/Wisconsin. Or you can call us at the 800 number 1-800 947-0553. After the other speakers go up, I'll try and insert those into the chat box so that you can have them.
Thank you so
much. One of the things
Sorry, I cut you off.
Yep.
Go ahead, George.
Yep, there's a number of pieces. One of the things is also the SHARP program. That is, if you've got a quality safety and health program, you can be recognized. This is sort of the consultations version of the VPP program, which federal OSHA operates. Again, if you've had a visit, if you've corrected all the hazards, now you have to correct both serious and other. You've got your low injury rates, and we'll look at what your safety and health management system is, and that will get addressed and assessed. So that's another dimension. Another service we do is our training activities. We have a weekly webinar every Monday at 1 o'clock. It's about 15 to 30 minutes long. We start with a specific topic, we give you information on resources, and then after that we have a Q&A period, sort of like this webinar that we're experiencing today. We do online webinar programs, and we do in-person workshops, of course, when the normal world is going on around us. One of the other aspects we've got separately funded is a COVID consultation program. The COVID consultation is exclusively to address COVID issues. It does not have the federal restrictions that the OSHA program has. It is funded from the Wisconsin Department of Health and the CDC NIOSH. And this is what COVID looks like in the country and the state as of the last 7 days, as of this morning. And so we can see that that's a prominent, the key issue. And when we deal with COVID issues, one of the real elements we need to be thinking about is the fact that there are layers of protection. Any one thing isn't going to fix the problem. We need to have multiple pieces in place. We can talk about that a little bit later. The COVID consultation program, again, it's no charge to businesses. We can help you with a COVID exposure prevention, preparedness, and response plan. We can help you identify different types of controls, and we can do job hazard and workplace risk assessments for you. It's just like the OSHA consultation, except that it's focused on COVID, and it does not have the company size limitations for the resources. Again, if we've got an online website and an email you can use to get that, I will include these in right after I'm finished. This is what their webpage or our webpage looks like for that. They will develop for you a report card, and that'll kind of give you a status of what you're doing on managing the circumstances. It includes the specifics, but it's really how are you managing and addressing it? How are you anticipating and detecting the hazards? How are you preventing and control them? What do you do for evaluation and planning, administration and supervision? What do you have for training? And then management, leadership, and employee participation. How are you operating all of those to address this particular hazard? And you can contact them again at that website piece. And from that, I will pass off to the next presenter and be back when there are Q&A.
Thanks, George. I'm not sure if it froze on me or not. Are we good to go?
Yep. No, unfortunately, I was on mute, so my apologies.
Okay.
A couple of glitches here today. Sorry, guys. Luke Lafave, managing partner of bioPure Fox Valley. Luke, you're on the ground getting our businesses cleaned up. I know you've been to the chamber a number of times. Could you share some of your insights with us?
Absolutely. Thank you, George. And as we talked beforehand, we were talking about different layers and how you have to layer everything you're doing within your workplace, within your homes, in your day-to-day. bioPure is one of those layers. We are a sanitizing and disinfecting company. So we don't clean, we don't scrub toilets, we don't take out the trash, we don't do any of that. We are strictly germs, viruses, bacteria, all of that. We come through after all the cleaning has been done, and we attack germs, viruses, and bacteria. And we do that with a couple of chemicals, and we use a green chemical, chlorine dioxide, and also a residual antimicrobial, which is just starting to come to the market. Maybe you've seen news stories out there of up to 90 days of protection. The CDC has not attacked the residuals yet, so we can't make any claims about it. There are about 50 studies out there that do show the effects of residual antimicrobials on hard surfaces, but we can get into that later. If you want to talk with me about them, I can show you the studies. So a little bit about bioPure. We are not just a COVID company that's come up just because of COVID. bioPure has been around for about 4 years, mostly in the South. It is a franchise. Brandon started it 4 years ago, and he was screaming from the rooftops saying you need to change your standard of clean. And if you take germs seriously, and you on a regular basis disinfect and sanitize, you can bring down the amount of sickness in your workplace. And he says it over and over again. I felt like Noah building the ark. I think we can all agree that today it's raining and it's about to flood, and we all need to get on the ark and change our standard of clean, really focus on sanitizing and disinfecting. If you are a note taker and you want to write anything down as far as what can you be doing, read the label. No matter what you do, you should be sanitizing and disinfecting as frequently as you possibly can, but read the label. I'm not sure if you can see this, but this is Lysol. It's pretty much every business out there has this in their space. If you read the label, it says to disinfect, the surface needs to be wet for 3 minutes before you wipe it off. As I go around, everywhere I go, I see places spraying and wiping it off. You aren't doing what you need to be doing if you are spraying most products out there on the surface and wiping it off. One of our leave behind products is chlorine dioxide, and you just spray it and leave it. It's food grade. You can leave it on the surface. And another thing to consider is like bleach-based products. You're supposed to do a water rinse after you're done because it's harmful to, you're not supposed to do food prep on it or any of that. Again, all we're trying to do is create awareness that sanitizing and disinfecting needs to become a part of what we do on a daily basis. We come through weekly, bi-weekly, monthly with electrostatics, so we can cover about 10,000 square feet per hour with chlorine dioxide, and the electrostatics, we can cover all the surfaces, some of the stuff that you can't, the nooks and crannies that you can't get to. And we also apply the residual antimicrobial to cover you throughout the month. And then you go through and do your normal cleaning practices, your normal spraying disinfectants, so that the transmission rate between employees, between customers, then goes down. And it's difficult to cover exactly everything that needs to be done, but we're here to help, and you can call me anytime. I'd be happy to go over what you're doing and what you should be doing, and we can go from there. And thanks for your time, and I will pass it off.
Thank you, Luke. We appreciate the fact that you've not only been keeping the chamber team and our members healthy and safe down at the chamber, but I also learned quite a bit just from your comments. So thank you for that information. Our third panelist today is Bonnie Kolbe, who is here to help us understand the issues and topics around safe business practices from a public health perspective. Bonnie, what are the top issues businesses are dealing with right now as they try to stay open or look to reopen in the new year?
Yeah, one of the big issues and the changes that have occurred most recently have to do with the quarantine time periods. Earlier this month, the CDC came out with new guidelines for shortening the quarantine time frames for those individuals that are asymptomatic, having no symptoms, but they are in quarantine because of their contact with a positive COVID case. The CDC felt that reducing the length of quarantine may make it easier for people to follow the quarantine by reducing the time that they have to be away from work. And people want to get back to work, and that's, that was the goal, I believe, to maybe make more people understand the importance of quarantine. A few days after that, Wisconsin DHS, Department of Health Services, came out with their support of those new guidelines. And that's the orders, that's the rules we follow from our Wisconsin DHS. And the quarantine periods are being shortened, can be shortened to 10 days, provided people still monitor their symptoms through the 14 days, because a typical quarantine period is 14 days after your contact with a positive case. The quarantine also may be shortened further to 7 days using a test-based strategy. The test-based strategy for shortening quarantine is changed from the previous CDC guidance and DHS guidance that quarantine should continue through the 14 days, regardless of any test results. Our local public health, we are following those guidelines. According to the new guidance, for people who do not develop symptoms, quarantine can end after you complete 10 full days of your contact with the positive person without having another test, and as long as you're asymptomatic, or after completing day 7, so not until day 8, of a quarantine and receiving a negative test, which could be a PCR test or an antigen test that was collected on day 6 or 7. And some people don't understand the difference between PCR and antigen, and I don't expect you to be experts on that. A PCR test is a molecular test. That is a test, those are the typical ones that they do the nasal swab, and then the swab is sent to a lab for further testing. That's the gold standard. That's the best test that is out there. In addition to that, the antigen test, that's known as the quick test. That can be done within, the results of it can come back within at least 15 minutes from when you have the test done. Now, there are certain rules around that, if you're symptomatic or asymptomatic, things like that, to determine if you are a case. And I won't bore you with those details. However, those are the 2 tests that can be done to have an earlier release from quarantine. Of course, the 14-day quarantine period is still the gold standard and that we would recommend under public health. So if you can do the 14 days, that is the best recommendation to continue with the 14-day quarantine. Daily symptom monitoring, monitoring your temperature twice a day, watch for symptoms of COVID, any cough, any shortness of breath, any of that is still needed through day 14, even if you go, if the quarantine ends earlier. Also, if you do return early from quarantine, so if a business says, okay, we're going to allow people to return at day 11, because it's after day 10, at day 11, if they are asymptomatic, they don't have any symptoms, and if they, and that is it, that's their guideline for that. You can do that, but what you need to know is that those individuals that do return to work or to your place of business, that they still have to separate themselves from other individuals. They still have to wear masks, and they still cannot be part of large mass gatherings. At least through that 14 days, everybody should be following that, but at least through that 14 days, they need to continue to do that. There's been a lot of discussions about athletes returning to the sports arena, and can they do that? Well, really, they can't safely do that because they can't separate themselves from others, and it's best for them to have the 14-day quarantine. It's still very important for anybody that is a contact, a close contact of an individual that is positive for COVID to get tested after day 3 from their contact with that person. We have posted guidance on this on our Calumet County website in addition to that. And sometimes people get a little confused too about isolation and quarantine, and they don't understand the difference between isolation and quarantine. I just gave a report to our board about it, and I think people were like, oh, I didn't understand that. So isolation is for somebody who has, is sick and has COVID, and they need to be away from others, even in their own home. That's isolation, and that's usually a 10-day period. Quarantine refers to the practice of separating individuals who have had close contact with someone with COVID-19 to determine whether they develop symptoms. You want to watch them, make sure they don't develop those symptoms or test positive for the disease. Quarantine also reduces that risk of transmission if a person later is found to have COVID because they were a contact of a positive case. It's for people who have been in close contact, like I said, with someone who has it. There is an exception to that, and that's excluding people who have had COVID-19 within the past 3 months. So if you have an individual, an employee who went through their isolation period, they're back to work, and it's a month later, and they're in contact with someone who is a positive case, they do not need to quarantine. That is up until 90 days after their isolation period. And people get confused about that also. And what counts as a close contact? If you were within, and these are the guidelines, so if you were within 6 feet of someone who has COVID-19 for a total of 15 minutes or more in a 24-hour period. If you provided care at home to someone who is sick with COVID-19, if you had direct physical contact with the person, hugged, kissed somebody, that direct physical contact while they were a positive case, if you shared eating or drinking utensils, and if they sneezed, coughed, or somehow got respiratory droplets on you. That's the importance of that environmental cleaning that was talked about earlier. And this would have been while the person is in their infectious process of COVID-19. So that can be up to 48 hours prior to them either being tested if they have no symptoms, or 48 hours prior to them showing symptoms. So anybody that they had the close contact with during those timeframes are considered contacts, and they need to be under quarantine. And as a special note, I talked, we as a group, we were talking a little bit earlier about face masks. Wearing a face mask or a face covering while you spend time with someone diagnosed with COVID-19, even if that person is also wearing a mask, likely reduces your risk of getting COVID-19. However, it may not prevent it entirely. If you and or the other person with COVID-19 were wearing a face mask or a covering during any of those above situations that I talked about being a close contact, you are still considered a close contact for quarantine purposes. So the mask may reduce that transmission, but if it comes to being under quarantine with a positive case, if you still do not follow all of those other practice guidelines, you're still considered a close contact and need to quarantine at that point. Some of the questions that employers ask is, how can I make safe choices around quarantining or protecting workers while still respecting their medical privacy? And we get questions about that too. And as employers, you may want to consult with your company's human resources, legal, medical, occupational safety and health guidance, policies, any other resources to help you develop your COVID-19 preparedness, response, and control plan. If employers are notified of a case of or an exposure to COVID-19, they must adhere to workplace and medical privacy laws and protections. Employers should also tell employees that when the health department or the employer notifies people who were exposed in the workplace, they will only share that they may have been exposed to COVID-19. They will not share names of any personal or medical information of the case with the contacts. The health department will offer recommendations for testing and quarantine based on that exposure. And employers must provide a safe and healthy workplace free from known hazards that are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Ensuring that your employees complete their recommended isolation and quarantine periods is necessary for maintaining that safe and healthy workplace. It's really very important. And what is the future for working remotely? As with all aspects related to COVID-19, it's not possible to predict what the future may hold. Currently, and for at least the next several months ahead, employees who can work remotely will be encouraged to continue to do so. Allowing employees to continue to work from home, that decreases their risk of infection in the workplace simply by reducing the number of people who are interacting with each other. And I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Bonnie, for sharing the insight. At this time, we're going to move into Q&A. Just a reminder, if you want to ask any or all of our panelists a question, please type it in the Q&A box and we'll be happy to ask it as part of the discussion. Please note the Q&A feature is different from the chat feature. Let's take a look at the queue and see what's out there first. So Bonnie, a question for you. If you have an employee or a family member who chooses to travel internationally over the holidays, any recommendations?
Currently, there is nothing out there to deter people from doing that. I mean, we would encourage people not to go and travel and to be amongst a large group of people. That will always be our guidance. But currently, there is nothing out there that says you must not do it, you cannot do it. Some businesses are saying, you know, when they come back, we want them to, you know, stay quarantined or whatever. And that might be an individual business practice. However, there is nothing legal about that, nothing to say that that has to occur at this point.
All right, thank you very much. Next question to the entire panel. What do we know currently about COVID-19 transmission on surfaces versus airborne transmission? We've talked about measures for minimizing both today, but is one or the other more of a priority?
I will defer to the two better experts on this.
George,
I mean,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
George.
I think the challenge here is the fact that it's really the, if you will, sort of that background. The word is epidemiology, but the background experience that we've had, and it's close personal contact. Now, exactly how that happens in close personal contact is up to a discussion. The fact that if you're in a room with somebody, you don't have to actually have contact with them. So clearly you can get it from the air in the room. The risk varies depending upon a whole bunch of things here, but you can get it that way. You can also get it from surfaces. At the same time, while it's on a surface, as time goes on, it becomes inactive. That is, it's not there. So the issue is how long those surfaces, how long it's been since someone's had those surfaces. So if your question is, I've done some stuff on the food product side. You know, if you have packaging and something is packaged and you get it 2 weeks later, you're not going to get COVID from a COVID positive worker off of the packaging on a food product 2 weeks later. You will very seldom hear me ever come out with a you won't. It'll always be it's a really low chance, but yet that's just not going to happen. And so, but at the same token, if you are coming up and using a kiosk like they used to use at McDonald's, and everybody is coming up to the kiosk, touching it and doing things, well, that's a whole different ballpark. But if the question is, do I have more risk from touching the kiosk or more risk of standing within 6 feet and spending more than 15 minutes with the clerk at the counter? Nobody can give you that type of an answer. Both of those are at risk. We need to address both of those circumstances.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, George. The next question is kind of on the same topic. On the topic of surfaces, what about fabric furniture? Is there a real effective way to clean chairs in waiting rooms or et cetera?
As far as I know, there is no way to effectively treat soft surfaces.
Okay.
Because the viruses, the bacteria can get in the fibers and under the fibers. And maybe George can correct me here, but I know we treat hard surfaces. The fabrics type surfaces are a whole different game.
Okay.
I mean, and the thing is, there's no practical way of doing it. There are ways that we can take, we do this for reuse of respirators, and there are ways that you can use a vaporous gas and treat it, but that's it. You know, that's a toxic gas to start with. So the issue is you could take it someplace and go through a process to do it, but one, that's just going to be complicated. And two, if you let it sit for the recommendation we've typically been using is 5 days. 5 days, and you're not going to have be able to contract COVID off of that surface. And so you want to restrict or eliminate, if you will, folks using those kinds of soft surfaces if you can't have that time delay as the most effective way to do it.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, George. Thank you, Luke. The next question is for Bonnie. As an employer, can I require my workers to take the COVID-19 vaccine when it is available?
No, not at this time. In fact, I researched that a little bit, and I just don't even know where my answer is on that. So because the COVID-19 vaccine is new, no legal precedence has been set regarding vaccination mandates. In the past, employer-mandated influenza vaccinations have been supported by the courts, but at this time, there is no legal mandate. We were told that employers cannot mandate that their employees get the vaccine at this time.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie. But the next question's for you too. You talked about working from home as being the best strategy for reducing transmission.
Mm-hmm.
Are hybrid schedules effective in minimizing risk of transmission in schools and businesses?
Yes, because what they do is they allow for cohorting. So if someone becomes ill and they are a part of a smaller group, if you're alternating days, whatever it is, then you have a smaller group of people that can become infected if someone ends up being positive. Then you have to quarantine a smaller group of people. It just makes sense.
Okay, perfect. Question for George. Are HEPA filters effective in office environments for preventing COVID transmissions?
And there's a two-part answer to that one. Certainly HEPA filters are effective. So that's really not a question. I'm going to tell you that also the higher level MERV filters, we recommend MERV 13 or better. That's also, I'm going to use the word relatively effective. Not as good as a HEPA, but it'll get us a long way down the path. The issue is that you need to make sure that the air is actually being brought and exchanged from the room. It goes through that filter and then it is delivered back into the space. And how that is delivered and the volume of air you're moving are as important as whether or not you've got the right filter. If you have a bad filter but the air's not really moving, it doesn't make a difference. If you've got a great filter but you're not getting enough air from the room to go through that, then you won't either. So you need the combination of a filter and effective airflow.
Sure, that makes sense. That makes sense. The next question says, for the panel, but probably Bonnie, should workers wear masks in the office, even if they are separated from their coworkers?
The recommendation is yes, and kind of on the similar line that George talked about, airflow. You can be in a room and they can be connected to the same air, and correct me if I'm wrong, George, but that you can be connected with the same air exchange system. And if you're a positive person, you can, spread it to the next person. However, I'm in my office right now and I'm not wearing a mask, so.
We won't tell anybody. Awesome. Let's see if there's any other questions at all. From a legal standpoint, what is an employer's responsibility with regard to preventing COVID outbreaks?
I can say, like I had stated.
I mean, I'm going to
go ahead, George. Go ahead.
Well, you can do as well. I'm going to go from the OSHA perspective, and that is under OSHA, and Bonnie did a really good job of almost stating the general duty clause from OSHA perfectly. It's like that's what she was saying. She didn't tell you that it was section 5A1 of the OSHA standard. She didn't, or of the OSHA Act. She didn't tell you it was a general duty clause. But those are the words she just used. And employers have a legal obligation. They have a duty to protect workers from hazards that they can anticipate and that they can control. And clearly, the COVID exposure for most employers is a hazard they can anticipate and control. And so from that perspective, under the general duty clause, they have a legal obligation to do that. I will tell you the challenge comes from having OSHA enforce that. And that is the amount of legal effort that it takes to direct at each and every single employer to try to apply that is enormous, and there's not enough government resources to do that. However, that doesn't negate the legal responsibility that employers have to provide employment in a place of employment free from recognized hazards causing or likely to cause serious physical harm or death. But that's where it comes from an OSHA perspective. I'll let, if Bonnie wants to chip in on sort of the public health and the community pieces, that's a different one.
You know, I think I just want to add in there that employers really should do their due diligence as far as if they are aware of a person that has COVID or that is under quarantine, as far as making sure that they are following the guidelines for if they are a positive case or if they are a close contact of someone who is positive, and enforcing that in your whole workplace. And also the employers really should be following, I'm sorry, my phone's ringing in the background. The employers really should be following the guidelines too, and masking and doing the things necessary so that they have a good role model for their employees.
Do you guys mind if I just chime in here a little bit? I'm going to address this from a business perspective, as a business owner talking to other business owners. Whether it's a legal issue or not, sickness is costing the economy trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and your employees being sick and customers getting sick. So whatever you can be doing affordably, you should be doing, because it's going to save you money in the long run. If your employees are sick, they're not making you money. If customers are getting sick, lawsuits could come down the line. So from a business perspective, rather than a legal perspective, you just should be doing everything you possibly can be doing, because it's going to save you money in the long run.
Thank you. What a great set of answers. The next question, some Fox Cities employers are requiring 2 negative COVID tests before people return to work. Is this necessary?
No.
You said that very quietly, Bonnie.
No. You know, employers should not require a sick employee to provide a negative COVID-19 test result. Employees with COVID-19 who have completed their isolation period may return to work. Individuals are no longer infectious and are released from isolation when at least 10 days have passed since symptom onset and at least 24 hours have passed since resolution of fever without the use of fever-reducing medications and the other symptoms of COVID have improved. If the individual tested positive for COVID and never had any symptoms, their isolation period is 10 days from the date of the test. You do not need to require any testing. And that might get a little confusing now because of that 7-day option for quarantine. And that's in a quarantine case, not an isolation case. But most businesses, most schools, most places are saying, we don't even want to deal with that, because how are we going to know if that person truly has the test done and if it truly is negative, and how are we going to know what they're presenting us is a true test?
Perfect. Thank you. And the next question is for Luke. What are the best places to source cleaning agents for my business?
Well, you can talk to me. We have a lot of product. We've partnered with a company that makes the chlorine dioxide. Comes like this. You can make it, and it's good for 15 days. And because it's food grade and no wipe, no rinse, no residue, you just spray it on as many hard surfaces and just let it do its thing. Other than that, I know a lot of the shelves are getting stocked back up, but like I said, just read the label and make sure you're not combining different disinfectants that you shouldn't be, like bleaches and quaternary ammoniums, because you'll make gases that you don't want to be inhaling. And make sure that if you're using some of the harsher chemicals, you're doing a water rinse after. You know, some places are using acids now. I caution you with that as well, because you could start destroying your facility, which you don't want to destroy your facility as you're trying to prevent COVID.
Thank you, Luke.
And I'm going to chime in there on one piece, and that is simply, I mean, whatever chemicals you're using, you want to make sure that you're following the appropriate practices for that. And from a business perspective, that means that you're going to be getting your material safety data sheets. You're going to have it as part of your chemical hazard communication program, and you will get that information from the vendor to make sure that you know what the hazards are and you know how you and your employees can safely handle it.
Perfect. I have to tell you, the people that are watching are giving us a lot of questions, so we're keeping them coming. How can employers create an environment where employees are encouraged to prioritize safety and destigmatize a positive test, wearing masks or other issues? I think we've all seen that.
I mean, workplace culture is a key element, and that culture comes from a couple of directions. One of those has to be how management approaches all of these issues. And so if you have not viewed worker health and safety from a positive perspective, it is going to be very difficult to do something today. If, on the other hand, you have had, from a management side, sick leave policies, which have always encouraged employees who are ill from coming to work. If you have practices that don't otherwise negatively impact employees when they identify hazards in the workplace, when they have legitimate concerns about different hazards that are occurring, when you involve those employees so that they know and understand the hazards, they know and understand what types of controls are there, and they have participated in selecting the controls, and they've participated in providing input about how you're managing the safe work practices for everything, then you will have a much better ability to do that. If they have not been able to participate in other hazards, and now you want them to do something for this one, but not that one, you need to be looking at all of the hazards and the risks you have in the workplace. And everybody's going to have a different level of acceptability for risk. And if you've not started that whole question about hazards, their risks, and what are acceptable levels, it'll be difficult. But if you go down that path, you'll have a much better chance to get compliance and participation with the workforce.
Thank you, George. I think that's it for questions for now. I do want to remind everyone that this presentation has been recorded and will be available as a replay through the Chamber website. All year long, we at the Chamber have been committed to connecting our local businesses with the resources they need during this pandemic. So chances are, between these Healthy Fox Cities events and all of the other information we have on our website at foxcitieschamber.com, we can help with many of your questions. I want to take one last opportunity to thank Ascension Wisconsin for being our presenting sponsor for this entire series. And of course, I want to give a big thank you to today's panelists for sharing their knowledge with us. George, Luke, Bonnie, thank you. 2020 has not been easy for anyone, and 2021 is around the corner with plenty of challenges as well. I hope everyone out there has a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season, and we at the Chamber look forward to serving you in the new year. Be safe, everyone, and thanks again for being here today.